Welcome to Nerd Index. Today we're going to be talking about our top 2 favorite anime series of all time and kind of our history of watching anime. I have my husband with me. Say hello.
Hello again.
So, I started watching anime in 2008. When did you start watching?
I think it was about 2010-ish.
Okay. And did you start watching as a subbed or dubbed viewer?
Mostly dubbed beginning, but quickly subbed.
Same, yeah. I have 2 or 3 years or so that I watched shows dubbed, and then I transferred over, I think, around the time that I watched Kami-sama Kiss, because I know that I watched that subbed. So the first shows I ever watched coming into anime, the absolute first was Fullmetal Alchemist, the original 2003 version, and then Black Butler and Ouran High School Host Club.
The first 2 that I can really remember watching the whole show of was Darker Than Black and Sands of Destruction.
And this is in the context of, like, it's the first anime you ever watched intentionally, like, you knew what anime was at that point and everything like that. Because I'm fairly confident that I saw, like, Naruto on Cartoon Network at some point or another prior to that, but it's like I didn't know really anything about it or I hadn't looked into anything prior to that. So.
Yeah, like I'd watched the original seasons of Pokemon,
Yu-Gi-Oh!
Digimon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! But
yeah. And then the first show that we watched together as a couple was Sword Art Online. When the very first season was coming out, we were watching it weekly together. How do you feel about watching a show together with someone, like intentionally having to wait for that other person to be there to watch it compared to like your previous years of being able to just watch whenever you wanted?
It wasn't too much different because before I always watched with my sister anyway.
Okay. No, for me it was literally like completely solo activity because I don't have siblings, so unless I could rope my parents into one particular show that I had already watched and wanted to like share, I didn't have to worry about it. What makes a 10 out of 10 show for you?
Probably something that's just fun, has engaging characters, and has good world building and interesting mechanics around the conflict.
All of the above. And then for me as well, it's also like it creates just an absolute obsession. Like I literally can't stop thinking about it. Sometimes I have dreams about those shows. I'll be like seeking out all of the art related to it. I'll have a little art folder specifically for that show. And it's also my desire to rewatch that show multiple times because for me, my normal state of being is that I absolutely hate rewatching things. So if I have that desire, I know that it's a top tier show.
Something else that you'll notice with my 2 favorite shows is they both have kind of gray good and bad sides.
Morally gray areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where you can't really say which side is the good or bad side sometimes.
Mm-hmm. My 2 absolute most favorite shows, one has completely stood the test of time of my entire anime watching career, which would be the Fullmetal Alchemist franchise, and then the second is the Case Study of Vanitas.
My 2 favorite are Darker Than Black and Bungou Stray Dogs.
And so we're going to go forward and talk about each show individually, and we're also going to include a reading of the synopsis just in case somebody hasn't watched it yet. The first show we're going to talk about is Fullmetal Alchemist, and the synopsis for that is: alchemy is bound by the law of equivalent exchange, something the young brothers Edward and Alphonse Elric only realize after attempting human transmutation, a taboo of alchemy. They pay a terrible price for their transgression. Edward loses his left leg, Alphonse his physical body. It is only by the desperate sacrifice of Edward's right arm that he is able to affix Alphonse's soul to a suit of armor. Devastated and alone, it is the hope that they would both eventually return to their original bodies that gives Edward the inspiration to obtain prosthetics called automail and become a state alchemist. The brothers seek the Philosopher's Stone, a mythical relic that allows an alchemist to overcome the law of equivalent exchange, in the hope of getting their bodies back. The brothers find themselves caught up in a nationwide conspiracy that leads them not only to the true nature of the stone, but their country's murky history as well. So I watched the original first. I actually watched it in a whole 24-hour binge. And then I watched Brotherhood. And I feel like that's the proper way to do it if you're going to enter the franchise for the first time. But I do prefer Brotherhood overall. And if you want a deep dive evaluation of the story, comparing not only the original and Brotherhood, but also the manga, then I'll link a playlist in the description for video essays about that. The story really got me through a difficult time in my life because being able to see Ed and Al overcome such unimaginable hardships themselves made me realize at the time that I could also overcome my struggles. But even without my bias, Fullmetal Alchemist is a very well-crafted story. It's extremely detailed and everything is interconnected in a satisfying way, and it is the kind of story that you feel emotionally invested in from very early on. It's very gripping.
Yeah, it's cool to see how the two main characters learn and expand their knowledge and fighting abilities throughout the show.
The magic system of alchemy is also really interesting in the way that each person has their own specialized field of study that they hone over time into their unique alchemy, along with the element of where the energy or power behind alchemy comes from, which is obviously a core of the show and carries through the entire thing and is a little bit of a reveal. And the basic law is that you can't create something from nothing and everything is connected, especially when you get into the alchehistory portion.
I like when shows have a magic system that is rooted in something, so there's a way of limiting their power.
Well, and it really showed how much research they did about alchemy, because alchemy is a historical study. It's just that we can't make it physical the way that they can in the show, and it felt grounded that way. Like, it made it so you could imagine a world where it was truly possible to make it happen. There are just so many micro and macro elements of the story that are woven together seamlessly into the overarching conflict, and the fact that it has such a definitive, clear ending is also really satisfying to me. It's just one complete story.
Yeah, it's really important to have that kind of foreshadowed from the beginning to the ending that gives you a conclusion.
So who's your favorite character for Fullmetal Alchemist?
My favorite character for Fullmetal Alchemist is probably Al, because of the positive, kind of light attitude that he brings into most of his scenes.
Yeah, literally aside from the, one instance of struggle with his identity that he has after the lab arc, Al is always really positive, even though he's the one that's seemingly suffering the most. And I think that it's really important that he maintains that kind of a relationship with Ed, because otherwise I don't think Ed would get through things quite so well without him there being like a kind of voice of reason and a more positive perspective or optimistic perspective. I do frequently suffer from main character syndrome. My favorite character for Fullmetal Alchemist is Ed, but I think it's also just impressive about how smart he is and how much resourcefulness he has to make what little they had left to them after the horrific events of their childhood work. And, even though they do continue to go through quite horrible events in their lives, he doesn't give up either, and he may seem really feisty and angry on the surface, but he's also very calculating. What would be your favorite fight or scene or story arc from Fullmetal Alchemist? Either the original or Brotherhood, realistically.
I think one of the coolest moments was in Briggs, when you learned that Sloth was digging the whole transmutation circle around the whole city, or nation.
Because it wasn't just central, it was for the entire nation of Amestris.
That really kind of kicked off the whole, we actually have to do something bigger now, rather than just exploring.
They unraveled that together as a group, and you could see that Ed was like, this is way bigger than just me.
That was a cool kicking off point for the middle of the show.
I think, for me, one of the moments that has always stuck with me the most was when Winry was faced with Scar, and she knew that he had killed her parents, and she found the gun on the ground, and the whole sequence of Ed talking her down from it was really touching, and it was one of those rare moments where Ed was being incredibly sensitive to another person, which was really cool to see that side of him too.
Remember in Rush Valley, you delivered that baby. You saved 2 lives. And you gave me an arm and a leg to replace the ones I've lost. It's your hands. They weren't meant to kill. They're meant to give life. That's why.
Now we turn the page to the Case Study of Vanitas, where in 19th century Paris, Noe is searching for the fabled Book of Vanitas, a clockwork grimoire of dubious reputation. Whilst traveling aboard an airship, Noe is saved from a vampire attack by an eccentric doctor who calls himself Vanitas and carries the very tome that he is seeking. Ironically, the self-proclaimed vampire specialist is a mere human who inherited both his name and the book from his master, the legendary vampire of the Blue Moon. Thrust into a conflict that threatens the peace between humans and vampires, will Noe cast in his his lot with the curious and slightly unbalanced Vanitas and his quest to save vampire kind. Now, it's probably going to upset some people, but I say it as Vanitas and not Vanitas just because it makes me personally feel silly saying it the proper way, not because I'm arguing how you're supposed to pronounce it. The show also got me through a very difficult medical crisis, but as a distraction more than an inspiration this time. And I absolutely love the show so much, and everything from the art to the world building and the characters is just so good.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how all the characters slot into their own place and have their own unique elements that are very integral to the story.
Every character is so dynamic and fully fleshed out personalities and intriguing backstories, and each of them serves a greater purpose to the story. No one is there for no reason. But Vanitas himself is especially intriguing to me as a character because you have to work so hard to earn his trust, and even we as the viewers have to work so hard just to learn a tiny kernel of his backstory. So it makes it very rewarding once you do finally figure something out. And I want so badly to know what his actual name is before he assumes the name of the Vampire of the Blue Moon, and I'm sure that anyone who's watched the anime also really wants to know what secrets Noe would see if he was finally able to drink his blood.
Yeah, Noe's power seems like it'd be a really interesting learning point of the show if he gets to use it on more people.
I'm sure they're going to do it at some point because they've talked about it so much. There's no other way for us to really learn the whole thing. And then obviously they foreshadowed or tried to say that Noe is going to kill him or something. And so you could think that maybe it would be from finally getting to drink his blood and seeing whatever it is that's in there, the memories.
つまり何を言いたいのかというと、バニタス、一口だけあんたの血を。アルシビスト。一度しか言わないからよく聞け。お前がもし俺の血を吸い、記憶を覗き込もうとするなら、殺す。わかったか。
And as a story centering around the lives of vampires, there's no lack of steamy relationships and blood drinking. Vanitas and Jean have such great chemistry, and their scenes together are just so electric. Their relationship is just the right kind of complicated drama for me. But that's not to say that Noe and Dominique's relationship isn't just as good. It's just that Noe is such a dense cinnamon roll that I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Or it's going to be way slow burn. I also really enjoy the added element of magic that the vampires have as like a way of rewriting the laws of reality to create their own specialized powers, such as with Dominique's sister using her ice magic. This resulted in a lot of really interesting fight sequences throughout the show. Who would your favorite character be for the Case Study of Vanitas?
I think I like Noe the most. Kind of the same reasons as Al. He brings the lighthearted nature into what's going on with the show, and he's got a cute cat who is potentially a mystery of himself.
Well, we don't have a full confirmation, but we think based off of the final moments of season 2 that Myrrh is actually Noe's teacher, or also known as the Shapeless One, and that this is him like transforming so that he can keep an eye on everything that's going on. And my favorite character is probably no surprise based off of what I said about the show, but it's Vanitas. And I think that, you know, just all of the mystery and intrigue surrounding him as a person is really compelling. What would be your favorite fight or scene or arc for the Case Study of Vanitas?
I think the coolest scene was kind of the wrapping up of the Beast of Javanin arc, where Chloe was playing the piano and rewriting history and creating the area around her into a different area.
And simultaneously bringing Nania down and revealing that she is actually the queen by shedding the shadows off of her, which was highly unexpected.
Yeah, it was a cool turning point for the show.
It's hard to pick between the sequence when we learned the backstory of exactly what happened to Vanitas in the lab, which subsequently told us what happened to him to get to the lab, and then we saw the little bit of him living with the Vampire of the Blue Moon and his adopted brother. That, or the final fight of the show between him and Noe, which you go into it thinking in the back of your mind that you're like, they're not going to kill a main character, and then you're sat there and you're like, well, they told us at the very beginning that they would, and so then you're sat there and you're like, is this it? Because it was so intense, and the stakes were pretty high still, and it was one of those things where I was actually watching it weekly, and so they left us at a cliffhanger episode where it legitimately looked like Vanitas had just stabbed Noe and it was over, and then, you know, the next episode opens with the fog clearing and just like finally come back to himself, and that was really, the whole thing was so well done. Either way, the story is packed with so much mystery and intrigue and wonderful characters that I'm sure that there's something in there for everyone, and I thoroughly encourage people to give the show a chance. Next, we have Darker Than Black, where 10 years ago, the mysterious Hell's Gate suddenly materialized in the middle of Tokyo, and the stars of the night sky were obscured in darkness. In their place, new stars emerged, each corresponding to an individual endowed with supernatural abilities. Devoid of emotion and conscience, these powerful killers have come to be known as contractors. In the Japanese city surrounding Hell's Gate, Section 4 Chief Misaki Kirihara finds herself at odds with an infamous contractor codenamed Hei. Called the Black Reaper in the underground world, Hei, like his associates, undertakes missions for the mysterious and ruthless syndicate, while slowly peeling back the dark layers covering a nefarious plot that threatens the very existence of the contractors. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding why the gates appeared and why people received powers and what's inside the gates, but there were also the dolls, which were such a fascinating concept to me. The fact that they're supposed to be emotionless reconnaissance tools in human form was really intriguing, and the fact that they had to use mediums, like how Yin had to be touching water to use her ability, was an unobstructive tactic to put a limiter on the whole thing. And watching Yin, in her own quiet way, break the boundaries of what a doll should normally be capable of made her character more compelling.
Yin and Hei both counteract their shells, basically, of Yin being a doll, not being able to do anything, but she learns to talk and smile. And Hei being emotionless, but he learns to actually really have an emotional connection with Yin and wanting to keep her together.
Yeah, their relationship together was really interesting. It wasn't necessarily romantic, obviously, but their connection was really strong, and you could tell that they both really cared for each other against the odds. The contractors' abilities also had limiters on them so that they couldn't be overpowered all of the time. Like, each contractor would have to pay a unique price or make a certain sacrifice in order to be able to use their abilities, ranging from having to just eat flowers to having to break your own fingers. And I appreciate that the series added these limitations because it made it that the characters had to work harder to figure out how to win fights or solve problems. They couldn't just immediately turn to their powers unless they were complete psychos and didn't care about their sacrifice.
Yeah, usually with shows with superpowers, you're like, wow, I'd really want those. This is the one show where you're like, but do I really want to deal with the consequences of having these powers?
I think we were also questioning, like, how do you figure out the first time? Like, you become a contractor by the grace of the stars or the gates or whatever, but, like, how do you figure out the first time you use your power what your payment was supposed to be?
They seem to just be compelled to do it.
Ugh. Yeah.
Like, the guy that uses his powers, and then he has to go and place stones in a very specific grid pattern.
Yeah.
Or in the opening scene, the guy that can fly, once he lands, he just has to start breaking his fingers.
Mm-hmm. So the story does a really good job of explaining to you a lot of the world building up front and continuing the mystery of the underlying issues with the gate, but then also tying in the police force group who are trying to figure out what the contractors are doing from that more normal human perspective, because I don't remember any of them having powers.
Police force was all just normal humans. And it's really interesting how you get all those multiple perspectives, and they kind of introduce the other perspective as antagonistic at first, like with the Evening Primrose, and then by the end of the show they're working together to try and solve the mystery.
Overall, it is a complicated, layered story, but it's placed in front of the viewer in a way that it is rewarding every time that you learn something, and it will keep you guessing for pretty much the whole time.
Right up until the last episode.
Who's your favorite character for Darker Than Black?
Darker Than Black has a lot of characters that I'd like to say are my favorite, but probably Hei and how he constructs his fights with people.
Mm-hmm. My favorite character is Yin, and I not only appreciate her, and her aesthetic is really beautiful, but also, like as we talked about, her relationships with the other people and how even, you know, with saying so little or expressing so little, she still clearly means so much to everybody there, and they also clearly mean so much to her. So what was your favorite scene or arc or fight for Darker Than Black?
My favorite fight is probably Hei versus Wei in, like, a subway.
He's the one that slings blood, right?
Yeah, Wei is throwing blood, and he can teleport anything that's hit with his blood to a different spot. And so the way that Hei handles moving the blood and placing it specifically on him so it doesn't actually hurt him when it gets moved is really interesting. And it really shows how thoughtful Hei is in all of his fights and how calculated he can be.
I mean, the most impactful thing that stayed with me from watching the show was when Hei went into the gate at the end of the show and talking to his sister and everything.
That was a cool scene to see how the Evening Primrose is actually there to help rather than to be an antagonist.
Yeah. And kind of any interaction between Hei and Kirihara was interesting because they respected each other but also were on different sides of the line. So their interactions were always fun or interesting as well.
But yeah, the first time we get to see into the gate with the shoes being placed specifically was a really interesting mystery and kind of showing how much of a weird place the gate is.
And like the people that were working at the lab around the gate and everything and how it was affecting them too, and how it kind of led us as the viewer to question if the people working in the lab were even unaffected enough to study the gate in the first place. Finally, we have Bungou Stray Dogs. Stalked by a beastly white tiger, Atsushi Nakajima has no idea that the menace lives inside him, a power that catches the attention of the Armed Detective Agency. Whimsical suicide enthusiast and supernatural detective Dazai has been investigating the same tiger that has been terrorizing the boy. Together, they solve the mystery, but its resolution leaves Atsushi in a tight spot. As various odd events take place, Atsushi is coerced into joining their firm of supernatural investigators, taking on unusual cases that the police cannot handle alongside his numerous enigmatic co-workers. For starters, you don't actually need to know anything about Japanese literary figures to enjoy the show, so don't let that deter you from trying to watch it. I've heard a lot of people say that they were concerned about that element, and it's just not a concern. At its essence, the show is more of an action-driven character drama that includes unique superpowers or magical abilities. And each character's powers are themed around either who their author was or one of their greatest stories, but those rules of the powers are explained through the show, so again, you don't need to know the history of it to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's cool that they used ideas of stories for the basis of their abilities.
But at the core of Bungou Stray Dogs, we have two clashing factions, the detective agency and the port mafia. And it's the kind of show where everyone is in a morally gray area, like we had talked about. And so you're kind of rooting for everyone. And it's not that there's always going to be a definitive villain. And I like that because it makes it so that your loyalties can change and evolve over time, and you don't necessarily know who you can trust all the time either.
Chuya, which starts out as one of the main villains of the show, but quickly becomes a likable little dope.
Not to completely spoil everything, but a lot of the characters from the Port Mafia will become a lot more friendly to the detective agency in a way where they will help them or they won't attack them anymore when they see them, and so really the only person that continues to be antagonistic is Octagawa. And of course the fight sequences are expertly handled, and you're not always going to be able to tell from the onset whose abilities should be able to beat whose. Plus, for many of the characters, their abilities evolve over time, which keeps things fresh. So you can see that there are a lot of fundamental elements of classic shonen fighting shows underneath it all, just with a higher tier character execution to tie it all together.
And something that a lot of other shonens don't do is it feels like all the powers leveling up is really and truly earned every time.
In this one specifically. Yeah.
Also, for fight scenes, the scene where the two people fight where they have both basically the same power, where they can see a few seconds before they were about to die.
The entire story arc with Oda and the backstory of how he influenced Dazai was an incredibly emotional story arc. It was very moving, very well done, and his final battle was also very well done.
It's a very beautifully animated fight scene, and it had the emotional weight of the last few episodes behind it, learning the backstory about the Port Mafia and how they handle doing things.
All in all, Bungou Stray Dogs is a lot more than just a superpower show, and it has a lot to offer from the character perspective as well. Who's your favorite character for Bungou Stray Dogs?
For Bungou Stray Dogs, I really like Dazai and how he can completely turn any scene that he's in.
Not only from talking, but also from using his power to shut people's powers off.
Yeah, it's really dynamic in what he does when he shows up.
And of course, he's also usually the comedic relief, so he's sitting there, not actually definitively trying to kill himself, but doing very silly things. And then he has actually an interesting rapport with my favorite character, which is Chuya, because they have like a little bit of a rivalry, but they also have a little bit of like the classic comedic duo thing going on. And so there's also a lot of backstory between them on their origins of joining the Port Mafia, and I think they've said a couple times that Chuya is kind of upset with him for leaving and all those kinds of things. But Chuya is really interesting to me for his powers, not only from the powers that we get to see him wield when he's just being normal, but also his unlocked abilities when his seal is unleashed.
And it's really cool how Dazai gets to be kind of his off switch.
Yeah, the partnership comes back in there again.
The give and take mechanic of that dynamic, as well as the main character and Akutagawa.
Atsushi and Akutagawa have a very similar partnership where their abilities feed off of each other really well, especially in the most recent season. It resulted in an evolution for both of their powers, and it was just really cool visually, and they have a lot more of an antagonistic relationship with each other that is also really fun.
Yeah.
Is there an arc that you always think of or comes to mind when you think of Bungou Stray Dogs?
No, you stole mine.
Oh, well.
And I stole yours, because I said it first.
Do you have, like, a favorite season then?
Probably the most recent season was the best.
Season 5 was so good. Oh my goodness. Everything with the fight on the boat in particular is just like really good. And you sit there and you look back at it and you're like, that was actually a really long fight, or we were there for a while, but it doesn't feel like it when you're watching it, and it was so well done. Season 5 was really energizing as a fan, and obviously we can't wait for what they showed us at the end to be the next step for season 6.
So in summary, are there any kind of common trends around our favorite shows or characters?
Well, a trend around our favorite shows is, coincidentally, all 4 that we've mentioned are from Studio Bones. And all 4 are, like, shonen fight shows if you want to boil down to the very base genre of it.
They all have different twists to their fight shows, but definitely shows with interesting power systems that have kind of a grounding root.
And then I'm sure you noticed from 3 of my 4 favorite characters, but I'm basically out here championing the angsty short kings of anime.
My characters tend to kind of be lighthearted and a little bit more fun in scenes.
So that gives you an idea of our favorite anime and the things about anime that we appreciate so much, and some of our favorite characters as well. In the future, you can expect to see a video that would be our top 10 out of 10 shows, but I thought that it would be nice to just touch on our absolute favorites for now.